Good morning. I think it's still morning anyway. Well, this is titled Confessions of a CIO, and I'm not sure I'm really going to confess anything to you that some of you already don't know and have recognized and seen in the business community. But the reason it's confessions is, frankly, from my 35 years with the Department of Defense, the department seems to be learning from business on a delayed reaction basis. They learn from their enemies very quickly. They learn tactics, techniques, and procedures for combat operations very quickly. They learn business skills much more slowly. So a lot of the things I'm going to have to say are going to reveal a lot of the latency, if I can use a network term, that exists in the government's adoption of technology. Talking a little bit about me, I guess my wife describes me with that bottom line term, jack of all trades, master of some. If there's something that you can do in the Department of Defense, I probably have done it at one time or another in 35 years, from CTO for the Air Force R&D community to CIO, right at the time Klinger-Cohen was coming into fashion in the department. The Air Force divides somebody's career up into their operational learning. That's when you're actually getting your hands dirty. Back then I used to write weapons delivery software for nuclear bombers. The tactical layer, where you're learning a little bit more about how to make, the game work, getting a little bit above the hands in the soup level. At that point, my job was to move people around under the base relocation and closure process, uprooting them from one part of the country and moving them somewhere else. And then finally, strategically, I was the command strategic planner during the time when the federal government had tried to adopt GEPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act, for the largest single command in the Air Force, that spent essentially half of all the resources in the Air Force directly appropriated to it, and about half of the other half indirectly allocated to it for maintenance and those sorts of activities. Excuse me. So with that in mind, I'll have to say most of the things I was able to accomplish in my government career were really to point out to people simple synergies and obvious connections that basically they didn't see. A military organization is compartmentalized for good purposes, very functionally aligned. People have jobs and they stick to them, and they do those well. And by rising to a level where you can see across all those stovepipes, or as we call them in the department, highly polished cylinders of excellence. Okay? The stovepipes had difficulty figuring out what was going on in the other guy's castle. As Mike Hammer used to say, they would launch business information to another castle and hope somebody over there was in a position to catch it. So a lot of the things that I was able to do were accomplished simply by having worked in so many different stovepipes that I knew what the other people did. That was very rare, particularly for a civilian. Military officers tend to move around quite a bit. Civilians, as we used to say, homestead, stay in one place. And one thing I found out for sure is if you made the right analogy to someone so that they could see what your point was in another medium, they would get it right away. And if they didn't, stop wasting your time trying to convert them. Okay, now that sounds odd for a process zealot and a process improvement person to say, but really at some point, you simply have to dispense with the organizational antibodies that are impeding progress, right? In the business space, my Harvard professors told me, you can fire people that are detrimental to the bottom line of the business. In the federal space, it's a little harder to do that. So finding something useful for them to do is the course of action. Most powerful analogy I ever found is this one at the bottom, which is to tell the leadership of the Air Force what business activity needs to be undertaken by analogizing it with combat. It's not as easy as you think, but for a process zealot, the most important process in the Air Force was planning the air war. So they had a capability called the Air Operations Center, which when I entered the Air Force service in 1975, was done with plexiglass maps and grease pencils. And that's how the air war was planned. I had some good friends who knew how to write backwards very well in these Air Operations Centers. And today it's done with business flows on very expensive Sun computers with all kinds of databases behind it and some very sophisticated processes. It started out in a world where the air planning cycle was 72 hours long. because you see, essentially we were planning world destruction. We were in a Cold War, a nuclear war environment. We occasionally did some little dust-ups here and there, captured some political leaders in Panama and brought them home to the United States, something like that. But mostly, we were planning to blow up the world. So 72-hour cycles seemed perfectly normal. Today, we're in a war against terrorism. Special operations forces, small compact operational units are the rule of the day. The Air Operations Center today puts weapons on orbit, pre-positioned like supply chain inventory, and plans on how those can be applied to hit targets, strike targets that have time-critical value. They'll be there for 10 minutes. A 72-hour planning cycle wouldn't let you attack something that will only persist someplace for 10 minutes. So a lot more sensor intensive. These are the units in the United States Air Force that operate air operations centers. Some of them are mobile, some of them are not. I had the great experience of moving one from Saudi Arabia to Qatar with 150 of my close friends from the engineering and installation teams, unplugging fiber optic cables and network connections and moving it to another political environment, let me put it that way. So these guys really know what they're doing about process. They're constantly improving that process because it matters, and they're trying to address the time-critical nature of it. So what better place to point the business community in the Air Force than somebody who's working in 10 minutes of persistence, right?